She was working with a broken hand, wrapped in bandages that told a story nobody bothered to read. Emma Davis carried trays with one arm, smiling through pain that shot up to her shoulder with every step. Her manager, Derek, circled her like a shark, his voice sharp and cruel, tearing into her for mistakes she didn't make. Customers watched, some with pity in their eyes, others shaking their heads at the scene unfolding before them. What they didn't know was that Emma's injury wasn't just an accident. Derek was hiding something darker, something that would shatter everything the moment it surfaced. Sitting quietly in the corner booth was George, a man everyone assumed was just another regular. But George wasn't who they thought he was, and the more he watched, the more the pieces stopped making sense. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support fuels stories like this, stories that matter, stories that need to be heard. Stick with us until the very end. And if this one moves you, share it with someone who needs to see it and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Now, let's begin. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and grease that clung to the walls no matter how many times they scrubbed. Morning light poured through the front windows, catching dust in the air as the breakfast rush kicked into full swing. The clatter of dishes, the hiss of the griddle, and the hum of conversation filled every corner. In the center of it all was Emma Davis. She moved like someone used to carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, balancing plates on her hip, pouring coffee with her good hand while the other hung stiff and useless at her side. The bandages were thick, wrapped from her wrist to her knuckles, yellowed slightly at the edges from days of wear. Every time her fingers brushed against something, she flinched, but she never stopped smiling. That smile was her armor, the only thing standing between her and complete collapse. Behind the counter, Derek leaned against the register, arms crossed, watching her with a smirk that never quite reached his eyes. His voice cut through the noise like glass. "Move it, Emma. People are waiting. You think they care about your little problems?" The words hit her like slaps, but she kept her head down, kept moving. A couple at table 5 exchanged glances, their voices low but sharp enough to carry. "Poor woman. Look at her hand. She shouldn't even be here." "Yeah, but Derek never lets up, always riding her. I don't know how she takes it." Emma heard them. She heard everything. The whispers, the pity, the cruelty disguised as management. But she had rent to pay, bills stacked on her kitchen table, a daughter who needed school supplies. Quitting wasn't a luxury she could afford. By mid-morning, sweat had gathered at the base of her neck, her good arm aching from compensating for the broken one. She delivered an order to table 8, whispered a soft "enjoy," and turned, only to collide directly with Derek. The glass of water in her hand went flying, splashing across his shirt. The entire diner went silent. Derek leaned in close, his breath hot and sour. "Clumsy again? You're just looking for excuses, aren't you?" A few customers shifted uncomfortably. Someone muttered, "Man, give her a break." But Derek ignored them. His eyes stayed locked on Emma, cold and predatory. She mumbled an apology, reached for a towel with her good hand, but he snatched it away. His grin was slow, deliberate, the kind that told her this wasn't about the spill. It was about power, and she knew exactly why. Weeks earlier, Emma had stayed late to finish cleaning. The diner was empty, quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the floorboards. She was wiping down tables near the back when she heard voices coming from the office. Derek's voice. At first, she thought nothing of it, but then she caught a phrase that made her stop cold. "Another easy 500. They'll never notice." Her stomach dropped. She pressed her ear closer to the door, barely breathing. Derek was bragging, laughing about skimming money from the register, blaming missing cash on sloppy paperwork. When she finally stepped back, heart pounding, the office door swung open. Derek stood there, staring at her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then his face darkened. "How long you been standing there?" She tried to stammer an excuse, tried to say she hadn't heard anything, but his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. He twisted it hard, and something inside snapped. The pain dropped her to her knees. Derek leaned down, his voice a whisper. "Clumsy, huh? Better stay that way. One word about what you heard, and you won't just lose your job. Now, with her hand bound and useless, Emma was the one being painted as incompetent. Every mistake, real or imagined, was added to a growing list. Derek made sure of it. By the end of her shift, her body trembled from exhaustion. She leaned against the back counter, eyes closed, whispering a prayer no one could hear. She didn't know it yet, but someone had been watching her every move. Someone who had seen through the lies, through the cruelty, through the carefully constructed facade. And that quiet observer was about to change everything. Most customers came and went without much thought, grabbing their pancakes, leaving a tip if they felt generous, and disappearing back into their lives. But one man never seemed to rush. He was older, maybe late 60s, with neatly trimmed white hair and boots that had seen more miles than most people would walk in a lifetime. People called him the vet because of the way he carried himself, straight-backed even when seated, eyes sharp even in silence. Most assumed he was just another retiree with nowhere else to be. Nobody knew that George Miller was the actual owner of the diner. For years, George had kept his identity hidden, preferring to blend in with the crowd. He believed you saw the truth when people thought no one important was watching. And what he'd been watching lately made his blood run cold. That morning, George stirred his coffee slowly, his gaze fixed on Emma. He'd been observing her for weeks now, always working harder than the others, always the one Derek targeted. But today, with her hand wrapped in thick bandages, it was different. Every tray she carried looked like it might slip at any second. Every smile seemed carved out of sheer willpower. At the booth next to him, two young men whispered loud enough for George to hear. "Man, that manager's got it out for her." "Yeah, I've seen the others slack off plenty, but he never says a word to them. Just her." George's jaw tightened. He had run businesses long enough to recognize cruelty when he saw it. And this wasn't just management. This was something darker. Derek strutted past George's table then, laughing at something on his phone. When Emma asked for help carrying a heavy stack of dishes, Derek didn't even glance at her. Instead, he muttered, "Use both hands." "Oh, wait, you can't." His chuckle cut through the diner like nails on glass. George didn't move. He didn't react. But inside, something hardened. Later, while Emma wiped down a counter, George caught the faintest wince in her eyes when she bent her wrist too far. He also noticed the way she avoided Derek, like a person who'd already learned that getting too close meant danger. Something wasn't adding up. The pieces didn't fit. An injured worker being forced to stay on the floor. A manager who seemed to take pleasure in her pain. Complaints that never seemed to reach anyone who mattered. When the lunch crowd thinned, George quietly asked for the manager. Derek came swaggering over, assuming it was just another customer complaint. "Food not hot enough? Coffee too bitter?" He smirked. George shook his head, just wondering about that waitress. "She's injured. Why is she working the floor?" Derek's grin faltered for a split second before returning. She's clumsy, always messing up. Half the complaints in this place are about her, but she begged to stay on the shift, so I let her. You know, I'm generous like that." George nodded slowly, though inside, every word from Derek's mouth tasted like a lie. Generous? No. He'd seen the way Derek sneered, the way the customers whispered, the way Emma pushed through pain just to keep her dignity. That night, George sat alone at the corner booth long after most had gone. His coffee had gone cold, untouched. He stared at Emma cleaning tables with her good hand, still smiling faintly at strangers, even though her eyes looked heavy with exhaustion. The old veteran narrowed his eyes. If Derek claimed Emma was the problem, then George was going to find out for himself. And if what he suspected was true, someone in this diner was about to regret underestimating both her and him. The next day, George returned to the diner. Same corner booth, same black coffee. To everyone else, he looked like the same old vet with nowhere better to be. But his eyes weren't on the menu. They were on Derek. Derek moved from table to table, cracking jokes with customers, laughing louder than anyone else. But the moment Emma walked by, his face hardened. Every move she made, he pounced. If she poured coffee too slowly, he snapped his fingers. If she wiped the counter twice instead of once, he smirked and muttered about wasting time. George noticed a pattern. It wasn't just criticism. It was targeted. calculated. And when Emma dropped a single fork, Derek shook his head dramatically, telling a nearby table, "See what I deal with." Always careless. Customers chuckled nervously, not sure if it was serious. Emma bent down, her good hand trembling, cheeks burning. By now, George's suspicion had turned into certainty. Derek was setting her up. That afternoon, George slipped into the back office under the pretense of looking for the restroom. The door was unlocked, papers scattered across the desk. His eyes landed on a stack of misconduct forms. Page after page had Emma's name scrawled across the top, each one accusing her of petty things: spilled drinks, forgotten orders, bad attitude. But George had eaten there for months. He'd never once seen Emma act out of line. He flipped further and found something worse. Cash register tallies that didn't add up. Every week the numbers dipped, but no reports had been filed. His stomach sank. He knew what theft looked like. He'd caught men in his old businesses before. Derek wasn't just cruel. He was stealing, and he was using Emma as the scapegoat. That night, George stayed longer than usual, sipping his coffee while the diner emptied. As the last customers left, Derek retreated to the office. The door didn't close all the way, and voices drifted out. "Another $5,000, easy," Derek bragged, laughter spilling into the hallway. And when they noticed the cash missing, that little waitress takes the fall. "She's already got the most write-ups. Nobody's going to believe her over me." A second voice, one of Derek's drinking buddies, snorted, "You're playing with fire, man. Where she talks." Derek's voice dropped colder. "She won't. Not with that hand. Broke it good enough to remind her who's in charge." George froze in the shadows, fists curling tight. The air in his chest turned heavy, each breath slower, harder. This wasn't just theft. It was abuse. Calculated, physical, deliberate. He thought of Emma, smiling through the pain, carrying on like nothing had happened, and something inside him twisted. The conversation inside ended with drunken laughter. George slipped out the side door into the night, the cool air cutting across his face. For the first time in years, his military instinct stirred. He'd seen injustice in the world, but to find it rotting in his own business, he wouldn't let it stand. The truth was out, and tomorrow, the mask would come off. The morning rush returned like clockwork. Coffee pots hissing, forks clinking, voices rising and falling across the diner. Emma moved between tables, her wrapped hands stiff against her apron. To most, she looked like just another tired worker pushing through the pain. To George, she looked like someone carrying a weight far heavier than dishes. But today wasn't going to be just another day. George entered quietly. Same boots, same denim jacket, but this time his shoulders squared differently. He wasn't here as a customer. He was here as the owner. Derek was by the counter, laughing too loudly, joking with two waitresses who rolled their eyes when his back turned. The second he saw George, his grin faltered. "You again? Back for the eggs." George didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the middle of the diner and tapped his spoon gently against his coffee cup. The soft metallic ring drew curious looks from every booth. Conversations quieted. Forks paused. Emma froze mid-step, her eyes darting toward him. "Morning, everyone." George began, his voice calm but firm. "I think it's time you all know who I really am." Derek chuckled nervously. "What? You writing a book or something?" George's gaze locked on him. "No, I own this diner." The room went dead silent. A fork clattered onto a plate. Emma's eyes widened, her lips parting in shock. For years, nobody knew the old man at the corner booth was the one signing their paychecks. Derek barked out a laugh, though his face had drained pale. "You're joking." George pulled a folder from under his jacket and placed it on the counter. Pages spilled out. Misconduct reports, financial sheets, photocopied register logs. "I've watched long enough. I know what you've been doing, Derek. Every false report you filed against Emma. Every dollar you skimmed from the register. And I know what you did to her hand." Gasps rippled through the diner. Customers turned in their seats. The two women from the business table whispered, "I knew it. I knew he was dirty." Derek stammered, his voice cracking. "This is ridiculous. You can't prove." Before he could finish, two uniformed officers walked through the door. George had called them that morning. Their presence alone silenced the room. Derek's bravado shattered. "Wait, you can't. This isn't." but the cuffs snapped around his wrist before he could finish. The diner erupted in murmurs as Derek was let out, his protests drowned beneath the clink of chains. Emma stood frozen, her good hand pressed against her chest. For once, Derek wasn't looming over her. For once, the weight of blame had shifted. George turned to her, his voice softer now. "You've carried this place on your back. While others lied about you, you kept it running. From today forward, you're not just a waitress. You're the new floor supervisor." Emma blinked, tears pooling in her eyes. The bandage on her hand trembled as she pressed it against her lips, a muffled sob escaping. Customers clapped, some quietly, some loud enough to echo. And for the first time in years, Emma straightened her shoulders, not as the woman people pitied, but as someone finally seen for who she truly was. Outside, Derek's shouts faded as the police car pulled away. Inside, the diner smelled the same, burnt coffee and grease, but the air felt different. Lighter, cleaner. George sat back at his usual booth, coffee in hand. But this time, he wasn't just watching. He was smiling, because justice had finally been served. Never underestimate the quiet strength of those who keep showing up, even when the world tries to break them. Emma's story proves that truth always rises to the surface, and justice always finds the guilty. If you believe stories like this should be told, hit that subscribe button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment below. Your voice matters too.